Dear students, in this session we are going to discuss about object-oriented programming techniques in JavaScript. So this session mainly covers the concept of classes and constructors. We know about the object-oriented programming concepts. The different object-oriented programming concepts are classes, objects, data abstraction, data encapsulation, polymorphism, data hiding, message passing, inheritance. So, if we treat a language as object-oriented programming language, that language should follow all these object-oriented programming concepts. And in case of our programming language Java, Java is a very powerful language and it can be termed as a purely object-oriented language. The thing is that in Java, we can write everything in the format of class concept as well as object concept. All other things will be not acceptable by the Java compiler. So Java can be treated as a pure object-oriented language. If you are considering the case of C++, C++ is an object-oriented programming language. But the case is that C++ is not a pure object-oriented language. The matter is that while we are writing a C++ program, we can include classes or we can write the same program without including the concept of oops. That is why it is termed as not a pure object-oriented language. JavaScript is entirely different from Java, and the concept of JavaScript is it is a scripting language and the script is used on the client side. JavaScript is not an object-oriented programming language. But while we are discussing the case of JavaScript, we use the concept of objects. So let us see whether the JavaScript can have the OOP concepts or not. Let us see when we can say a programming language object-oriented. A programming language can be said as an object-oriented language when it follows the corresponding OOP concepts. So to qualify as object-oriented, programming languages must provide support for the following: data abstraction, encapsulation, data protection, and inheritance. We see the concept of data abstraction. Data abstraction means it is the act of showing essential features. So we know that we are having a lot of features to display. But based upon the situation, only the essential features are displayed and rest of them will be hide from the external users. That concept is termed as data abstraction. The next concept is encapsulation. Encapsulation terms the wrapping up of data and functions together into a single unit. So here the data as well as functions are bind in the format of, it is encapsulated in the format of a capsule, and that can be implemented in the form of classes. We know that a class contains properties as well as corresponding functions. So in in the format of a class, encapsulation is achieved in object-oriented programming. Another concept is data protection. And in case of OOPS, we know about the different types of access specifiers: public, private, protected. And these are the three main access specifiers. If we declare anything as public, that will be visible to everyone. If we declare it as private, it should be visible to the corresponding class members only. And if we set it as protected, if we set a data member as protected, it will be inherited to its corresponding child class. So this type of data protection is available in OOPS. And another important property of OOPS is inheritance. Inheritance is a concept which is used for reusability of the code. That is, it is the process of creating new class from an existing class. And this new class is having all the properties of its parent class. So these are the main concepts that are available in object-oriented programming languages. Let us see whether JavaScript is an object-oriented language or not. JavaScript is not an object-oriented language. We know that JavaScript is a scripting language and it is implemented on the client side of internet architecture. JavaScript does not support data abstraction in the form of classes. Neither is there support for data protection. So in case of JavaScript, we already seen what are the main concepts behind OOPS. And in that, it is clearly specified that data abstraction, then encapsulation, data protection, and inheritance are there. But in case of JavaScript, JavaScript does not support the concept of data abstraction and data protection. So that we can say that JavaScript is not an object-oriented language. However, JavaScript is defined as an object-based language, but this JavaScript can include the concept of encapsulation as well as inheritance in the form of objects. So, JavaScript is not an object-oriented language, but it can be considered as an object-based language due to its facilities like encapsulation and its inheritance. As I said, JavaScript is an object-based language and we already studied about the different object models that are considered in JavaScript, like document object model, browser object model. And in case of this document object model, all the elements in a web page should be treated as object. And in case of browser object model, it treats window as a corresponding default object, and all other facilities like navigation, location, history, everything in the window should be treated as again objects. And while we are discussing the concept of data types in JavaScript, there also we treat array as object and object facilities are there. So the JavaScript objects means objects are having some properties, functions. So objects in JavaScript are merely list of properties, functions and other objects. And there are mainly three types of objects in JavaScript: native objects, host object and user defined object. We see what is native. It is strictly defined within the language. Within the language it should like number, string, image, array, etc. And another type of another type of object is host. It is predefined by another source. So related to the script's environment. So host objects are predefined objects and it is related to the corresponding script. And the third type of object is user defined object, and that can be related to our object oriented concept. Let us see the OOP techniques that are used in JavaScript. So in case of OOP concept, we first think about the first concept, class. And here in JavaScript, the class syntax is not introducing a new object-oriented inheritance model to JavaScript. JavaScript classes provide a much simpler and clearer syntax to create objects and deal with inheritance. So in case of JavaScript, the class syntax is not having much more influence on the inheritance property of the JavaScript. But these classes are having a simple as well as clear syntax to create objects, and it can have deal with inheritance concept. Next we see how we can define classes. Classes are in fact special functions, and just as you can define function, expressions and function declarations. The class syntax has two components, class expressions and class declarations. So in JavaScript, if you are going to define a class, the class definition should be same as that of creating functions. So here the class syntax is having two components, class expressions and class declarations. Let us see what is class declaration. It's one way to define a class is using a class declaration. To declare a class, you can use the class keyword with the name of the class. So a class keyword is needed followed by the class name. Here an example is there, class rectangle, then followed by a block. Inside the block, the first statement is constructor height, width. So inside the constructor function, this dot height is equal to height, this dot width is equal to width. So this means that we are trying to create a class. The name of the class is rectangle, and this rectangle class is having a constructor. This rectangle class is having a constructor with arguments height and width, and inside that it is specified as this dot height is equal to height and this dot width is equal to width. So height and width are the properties of this rectangle class. Class expressions. A class expression is another way to define a class. While defining the class, I already told you that two methods we have to consider while defining the classes, class declaration and class expression. So class expression is another way to define a class, and this class expressions can be named or unnamed. The name given to a named class expression is local to the class body. So if you are providing a name in class expression, that should be local to that corresponding class body. Here we are having code snippets for unnamed classes and as well as named classes. Here we can see that variable rectangle is equal to class of, inside that constructor height width, this dot height is equal to height, this dot width is equal to width. So this expression is an unnamed class expression because class is not followed by a class name. Here it is mentioned that we are having a variable rectangle, and this rectangle is assigned with a class definition. Inside the class, a constructor is there specifying two arguments, height and width, and it is clearly mentioned that this dot height should be the first parameter of constructor function, and this dot width should be the second parameter of constructor function. So it means that this particular class is having attributes height and width, and it is an anonymous class or unnamed class. We can make classes with names, and this is the code for named expressions, named class expressions. Here variable rectangle is equal to class rectangle, then with the constructor function height width, this dot height is equal to height and this dot width is equal to width. So in this case of named expression, a class name is followed by the keyword class. That is the difference. But this class name is local to the corresponding class body. Another important concept in object-oriented programming language is the concept of constructors. We know what is a constructor in OOPS. Constructor means it's a special member function which has the same name as that of a class, and the purpose of constructor is used to initialize the object. So this constructor function will be automatically invoked when an object is created. So these are some of the concepts behind the constructor. Now we can see how this constructor is applicable in JavaScript. The constructor method is a special method for creating and initializing an object created with a class. So here also the constructor is a special method which is used for creating as well as initializing an object. There can only be one special method with the name constructor in a class. And in case of this JavaScript, constructor functions are defined with the keyword constructor. And for a particular class, only one constructor can be fixed. In other programming languages, this constructor function is having the same name as that of a class. At the same time, we can specify different types of constructors like default constructor, parameterized constructor, copy constructor. So many variations are there. But in case of JavaScript, we can only specify a single constructor class or constructor function in a class. A syntax error will be thrown if the class contains more than one occurrence of a constructor method. If you are trying to define multiple constructor functions in a JavaScript class, it will show an syntax error. A constructor can use the super keyword to call the constructor of a parent class. So if we are using in the case of inheritance, the constructor is using the keyword super to call the constructor of S parent. Another important keyword which is related to OOP concept is static. Static methods, static variables. So the static keyword defines a static method for a class. Static methods are called without instantiating their class and cannot be called through a class instance. And in case of static, a static variable as well as a static member can be called without the help of an object of a class. Static methods are often used to create utility functions for an application, and in case of the static methods, we know that static methods are invoked without the help of an object, so that this type of methods are used for creating utility functions for an application. Here we are having a code with us, and in the code we can see how this static function is used. And actually this code snippet is used to find out the distance between 2 points. Let us see what is inside the corresponding code. So here class point. So a class definition is here. Class is followed with a class name. Here the class name is point. Inside the class definition, the first function is a constructor function which takes two arguments x and y. Inside the constructor, this dot x is equal to x and this dot y is equal to y. So this means it's a current object. So this particular point class is having two properties or two attributes x and y. Then after the constructor function, a static distance function is defined with arguments a and b. Two arguments are there. The name of the static function is distance. Then inside that, constant dx is equal to a dot x minus b dot x. Constant dy is equal to a dot y minus b dot y. So here constant dx and constant dy mentions these are constant values. So what happens is uh, it will take a dot x minus b dot x. It will take the differences of x attributes in both a and y, and also the differences of y attributes in a and b, and it will return math dot hypot of dx comma dy. Math dot hypot means math is a particular object in JavaScript, and using the math object we can access the mathematical properties. So hypot property means this function is used to find out the square root of x. Hypot of x comma y is same as that of square root of x square plus y square. So here it will return the square root of dx square plus dy square. That is the hypotenuse function in mathematics. So that is happened in static distance function. Then after that class definition is closed. Then after the class definition, const p1 is equal to new point of 5 comma 5. So a constant object, a constant variable p1 is created, and it will be treated as an object for point class with values 5 5. So what happens is this 5 5 will be copied to the constructor of point class. X will take value y 5 and y will take the value 5. Then another p2 is there, new point of 10 10. So x is having 10 in p2 and y is having 10 in p2. Then next statement is console.log of point.distance of p1 comma p2. Console.log means it is a function which writes output on the console part of the corresponding uh, program or console area, and inside that it should produces the return value of point.distance function in the console part. So here what happens is point.distance of p1 comma p2, using p1 constant and p2 constant we are trying to access the distance function. So a p1 is copied to a and p2 is copied to b. So what happens here, it is p1's x value and p2's x value will be the difference between that will be calculated and that will be stored in dx. Likewise, the distance from p1's y value or the difference between p1's and p2's y value are stored in dy. Then after that, it will find out the hypotenuse of dx and dy, and that value will be printed in the console area. Let us see how we can implement inheritance in JavaScript. So in case of JavaScript, subclasses will be done using the extends keyword. Subclassing with extends. The extends keyword is used in class declarations or class expressions to create a class as a child of another class. So here we are having example class animal. So a class is created with name animal, and inside the animal class a constructor is there with name attribute, what with a single attribute, and this dot name is equal to name. So it means that animal is having a property name. Then another function called speak. The member function of this particular class is termed as speak. Inside the speak function, console.log of this dot name makes a noise. So speak function is used to print this data on the console. It's just for printing this particular name will make a noise on the console. So this is the animal class. So animal class is having a property called name and having a function called speak. So another class dog extends animal. Class dog extends animal means all the properties in the animal are inherited to dog class. So what all things are in the animal, that is also available in dog class. So in this dog class, it again specifies a function called speak. Console.log of this dot name barks. So here I already mentioned that animal is extended to dog. So what all things are inside the animal? Animal is having a property called name and it is having a function called speak. That things are automatically arrived to dog class by using the keyword extends. So speak console.log of this dot name. Already name is inherited from animal plus box. So what happens here it is, this is the animal class, this is a speak function. Then after the speak function, animal class dog class definition is closed. Then after the dog class definition, variable d is equal to new dog of mid-c. Variable d is equal to new dog of mid-c. So what happened is, dog is a class which is inherited or which is extended from animal class. So here what happens is, the constructor function of the animal class will be invoked. So here mid-c will be copied to this name and animal's name will be assigned with mid-c, and that name is available in dog class. Then this dog object is allocated to variable d. So d dot speak. D dot speak means d is a member or d is a variable which is related to dog class, and that d is trying to invoke the speak function. So console.log of this dot name. Already the name is assigned with value mid-c, so it will display mid-c box. If there is a constructor present in subclass, it needs to first call super before using this. So if another constructor is placed in dog class, we have to, inside the dog constructor, we have to use super keyword or just specify super function to invoke the parent class constructor before using this variable. Likewise, we can implement inheritance in JavaScript. For implementing inheritance in JavaScript, we have to use the keyword extends. The next is object constructor and prototyping. And in the world of OOPS, we need a way to create an object type that can be used multiple times without having to redefine the object every time to meet each particular instance needs. So the main property of object is reusability, and the standard way to achieve this is to use the object constructor function. An object constructor is merely a regular JavaScript function, so it's just as robust. So in order to make the reusability of the code, we have to create an object constructor function in JavaScript, and it is similar as that of a JavaScript function. The difference between the two is that a constructor function is called via the new operator. If you want to invoke a constructor function, we have to use the new. In the previous example, we see that if while we are creating a variable for a particular class, we are trying to use the keyword new, then only the corresponding member function will be, or member properties will be allocated, or memory should be provided only with the new operator by basing our object definition on the function syntax. So let us have a real world item cat as an example. A property of cat may be its color or name. A method may be to meow. The important thing to realize, however, is that every cat will have a different name or even meow noise. To create an object type that accommodates this need for flexibility, we will use an object constructor. So we are trying to model a real world object, and we are trying to model a cat as our example. A cat is having properties, its color and name, and a function which is related to cat is meow, because the concept is that every cat is having a different name as well as a different noise. So inside the script, we're trying to model that particular example. Script language JavaScript, type is equal to text bar JavaScript. The function is cat. Then it will take a parameter name. This node name is equal to name. This dot talk is equal to function of this dot talk can be defined as a function. Alert this dot name say meow. Then this is the corresponding function, and then after that cat1 is equal to new cat of Felix. So cat1 means it is creating a new cat Felix. So what happens here, it is Felix will be allocated to name. So for this particular cat variable, cat1 variable, name is having the value Felix. Then cat1 dot talk. Cat1 dot talk means cat1 is already defined, and its name part is having a value Felix. So using that cat1, we are trying to access the function talk. So this function will be invoked. An alert box will be produced with Felix say meow. Felix say meow. Then cat2 is equal to new cat Ginger. So another cat variable cat2 is created. At the time of creation, Ginger will be copied to name. So this cat2 name property is having a value Ginger. Cat2.talk. Cat2.talk means we are trying to access the talk function with variable cat2. So in cat2, the name variable is having the data Ginger. So here the output is an alert box will be produced with message Ginger says meow. The script is over. So in the previous example, the function cat is created in the format of an object constructor, and its properties and methods are declared inside it by prefixing them with the keyword this. Objects defined using an object constructor are then instantiated using the new keyword. And in the previous example, we did not define, or we did not specify the term class. Instead of that, we simply specify the class with the term function. We are trying to define the class concept in the format of a function, and that function is termed as object function or constructor object. Objects defined using an object constructor are then instantiated using the new keyword, and we can initialize that object constructor using the new keyword. Notice how we are able to easily define multiple instances of cat, each with its own name. That is the flexibility of object constructor brings to custom objects. And these constructors create the blueprints for objects and not the object itself. So constructors This type of functions can be easily used as object constructor, so that we can easily create multiple instances for the corresponding object constructor function using the new keyword. Now let us see how we can add methods to our object using prototype. We saw above how to add a method to our constructor function by merely declaring it inside the function, and another approach for adding method is prototyping, which is also more popular due to its elegance. So prototype means it's a type of inheritance in JavaScript, and we use it when we would like an object to inherit a method after it has been defined. So prototyping means attaching a method to an object after it is being defined, in which all object instances then instantly share. I already mentioned about the prototype facility in the object part of JavaScript. So prototype is a type of inheritance in JavaScript, and it is the idea behind prototype is we are trying to add new methods to an existing object. So let us see how we can add methods to our object using prototype. Let's extend our original cat object above with an additional method to change the cat's name using prototype. So we already seen the cat function, and cat function is having a constructor, and it mentions a property name, and it is having a function called talk. So we are trying to add something to the corresponding cat function. Cat.prototype.change name is equal to function name. This node name is equal to name. So here what happens is we are trying to add one more function, and that function name is change name. So change name is the function name. So this is the function name dot prototype of new function name. So cat is our initial function, and inside that function we are trying to add new function. That new function is change name. Change name is equal to function of name. This dot name is equal to name. So this change name function will take a parameter, and that parameter is assigned to this dot name. So here if statement is there, first cat is equal to new cat of parser. New cat of parser means initially a cat variable is declared, and the variable name is first cat, and the name of that first cat is parser. Then after that, first cat dot change name of bill. So what happens here, it is initially first cat variable is having name parser, and now we are trying to change the name to bill. So here we are calling the change name with argument bill. So bill is copied to here, and this dot name will be assigned with bill. So it will replace parser with bill. So first cat is having the name bill now. Then first cat dot talk. After that we are calling talk function using first cat. So it will produces an alert message like this: bill says Mio, because parser is overwriting with bill value. So it will produces alert message like bill says Mio. As you can see, we merely use the keyword prototype immediately following the object name to utilize this functionality. The custom method change name is now shared by all the instances of the corresponding cat class. So in modern JavaScript, this prototype can be set using underscore prototype underscore. So JavaScript had prototypal inheritance from its beginning, and it was one of the core features of the corresponding language. But in the older times, there was another way to set it, to use a prototype property of the constructor function, and there are still many scripts to use it. But now we are having a simple function like this: the prototype property new f. New f means it is trying to create a new object. When a new object is created with new f function, the object's prototype is set to f.prototype. So this is one of the advancements that are available in JavaScript, new f. the function is used for creating a new object. If you are creating an object like this new f function, we can set the prototype as f.prototype. In other words, if f has a prototype property with a value of the object type, then new operator uses it to set prototype for the new object. Please note that f.prototype here means a regular property named prototype on f. It sounds something similar to the term prototype, but here we really mean a regular property with this name. So new f is a term we are going to create a new object. So whenever a new object is created with new f, the object's prototype is set to f dot prototype. So instead of specifying the big syntax, we just use f dot prototype. So this f dot prototype property can be easily used with the objects. Let us see an example related to F.prototype. So here is the code. Let animal is equal to eats true. So animal is a variable and it is mentioned, the assigning value is mentioned in block. So animal is treated as an object variable. At the same time, animal is prefixed with keyword let. So let indicates that the scope of a variable defined with let is block scope. So animal, the scope of this particular animal variable is limited to a particular block. And another point is that this animal is having a property called eats. It is defined as having a value true. Then after the animal object declaration, function rabbit name, this dot name is equal to name. A function which is named as rabbit and it takes an argument called name. Then after the function definition, rabbit or prototype is equal to animal. Rabbit is a function and it is adding prototype towards this rabbit function and the added prototype is animal. So what happens is inside the rabbit function, the animal object variable is added. Then let rabbit is equal to new rabbit, white rabbit. So we know that the scope of a variable defined with let is block scope. So here what happens is a new rabbit object is created with name white rabbit. So with argument white rabbit means white rabbit is copied to name, and for this small rabbit the name is white rabbit. Then alert of rabbit.eats. Rabbit is actually an object of this rabbit function, and at the same time this small rabbit is having name white rabbit and we are trying to access rabbit.eats. Actually eats is a value which is declared in the animal block. So before accessing that, it already specified that rabbit.prototype is equal to animal. Animal is already added to rabbit function so that each property can be accessed using the small rabbit. So it will produces a true value. So setting rabbit.prototype is equal to animal literally states the following: when a new rabbit is created, assigns its prototype to animal, which means that assigns its prototype means whenever a new rabbit object is created, this object is having the property eats. Clear? Then default f.prototype constructor property. Every function has the prototype property even if we do not supply it. The default prototype is an object with the only property constructor that points back to the function itself. So default f.prototype property is an object with the only property constructor that point back to the function itself. So here we are having a code function rabbit The default prototype of function rabbit is rabbit.prototype of constructor.rabbit. If you are not specifying the corresponding prototype, it will be automatically called. By default, this constructor function should be called. Function rabbit by default rabbit.prototype constructor rabbit, or we can make alerts like this: alert of rabbit.prototype.constructor is equal to rabbit. So it will produces a true value. And this is the summary related to oops, the f.prototype property is not same as prototype. The only thing f.prototype does, it sets prototype of new objects when new f is created. The value of f.prototype should be neither an object nor null. Other values won't work. The prototype property only has such a special effect when it is set to a constructor function and invoked with new. This is the summarized portion of f.prototype property. So this is all about oops. Thank you.